Hello, I am Sarah with Dandelion Seeds Positive Parenting, and today I am positively thrilled to be talking with Dr. Ross Greene, author of all sorts of wonderful books, not the least of which is, of course, The Explosive Child. I have that on my lap, as well as Raising Human Beings, Lost at School. So if you haven't checked out any of these books already, by all means, please do, because he is so good at what he does. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Very good. Well, let's dive right in. As we know, children naturally have big emotional responses to things sometimes. It is biologically and developmentally normal. When do we know that we have an explosive child or an implosive child or any of the other ways that behavioral challenges can manifest? How do we know when we're dealing with something that is perhaps outside the realm of what most parents are dealing with?
Well, it's a very interesting question because it's a bit subjective. And it's not only about what's quote unquote normal in a kid, it's about what a parent's tolerance is for how their child is reacting to life's problems and frustrations. I don't worry too much about, is my kid explosive, is my kid implosive, because those are not real categories. I worry about, how's my kid doing? How do I feel my kid is doing? Is my kid responding to life less well than I was hoping they would? Or that maybe by comparison to other kids or by comparison to my own other kids, is my kid struggling more than I would like them to be? I would say that those are the questions I'd rather be asking myself as a parent rather than relying on categories that are kind of artificial. If you think your kid's doing well, I'm probably going to believe you. If your kid is struggling, I'm probably going to believe you there too.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. And I like how you put the onus on the parent to really know their child. This is not about a textbook definition anywhere. This is about a relationship, correct? Yeah, very good. Let's talk about anger specifically. I have heard many times that anger is oftentimes the shield for other emotions. What's really going on when a child expresses anger on a regular basis?
Well, and I don't know that I would call it the shield. I would say that it is the way the kid is communicating something to us that's very important. And what they're communicating is that there are expectations they're having difficulty meeting, period. And that actually starts to get really interesting, because anger is not the only way that a kid can communicate to us that they're having difficulty meeting certain expectations. Anxiety can be an expression of the same thing. Depression can be an expression of the same thing. And so different kids have different ways of communicating to us that there's a certain expectation that they're having difficulty meeting, whether it's something as seemingly benign as difficulty brushing teeth before going to bed at night, or as seemingly grave as difficulty coming in for curfew by midnight. Bottom line is, the way we adults communicate with our kids about our values, our experience, and our wisdom is through our expectations. And if a kid is meeting a particular expectation, then we have what's known as compatibility, and things are going okay. But if a kid is not meeting a particular expectation, once again, whether that's related to teeth brushing or some other aspect of hygiene or schoolwork or curfew or who they're hanging out with, now we have what's known as incompatibility, and we have a problem that needs to be solved. So I wouldn't call it a shield, because that would make it sound like the kid is saying to us, don't come any closer. I think anger is saying to us, there's an expectation I'm having difficulty meeting. And as I said earlier, that's where it gets complicated, because the kid may be having difficulty meeting the expectation because they are just not capable of reliably meeting it at this point. But it could also be that, and this would not be uncommon, sometimes we adults put expectations on kids that they're not even close to being able to meet. So could be either, could be or. Sometimes we adults put expectations on kids that we think they should meet, but we have no idea why. That's an expectation not worth having. So that's where, you know, in my role with families, I'm actually helping parents sort that stuff out. And sometimes the most important question I can ask them is, why do you have that expectation for your kid? And if the answer is, I don't know, then I'm frequently saying, well, if you don't know why you have that expectation for your kid, then I don't know why you have that expectation. So life gets interesting when it gets into expectations that we adults have for kids and a kid's capacity to meet that expectation reliably. That's where life gets fascinating.
And what an important shift it is to do a turnaround for the parent, because oftentimes it really is about, you know, be it our inner child or something else that we're processing as an adult, something that we think should be a certain way. And I do the air quotes with should, because we all have so many of the shoulds. Often they're not rooted in reality as far as who our child actually is versus
Correct.
what they should be doing in our mind's eye.
Correct. And if you ask me, Ross, in the 2,000 families that you've worked with over the last whatever number of years, what have you seen cause conflict most often? And this applies to schools as well. Putting expectations on kids that we already know they cannot reliably meet. And there's a whole mentality out there that you got to make the kid stretch. You got to push the kid. Not to the point that it's ruining your relationship with the kid. Now things are, you know, bass backwards, right? You're sacrificing your relationship with your kid because you want them to stretch. I've got ways to help your kid stretch that are not going to sacrifice your relationship along with it.
Yes, thank you. That is so important because relationship is first. Everything else is secondary. So I'm so glad that you have that philosophy and that that's what you share with
Yeah.
parents, because that really is a major shift from what a lot of us come into this role thinking. We think we're supposed to guide and push and what have you, but just because one kid did something doesn't necessarily mean another child will. They're all individuals here.
Correct. And you know what? Guidance is great if there's compatibility, right? If your kid is responding well to your guidance, you're good to go. If your kid is not responding well to your guidance, you got a problem to solve.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and you mentioned a minute ago two key words that make all parents' ears perk up a bit: anxiety and depression. As those relate to expectations, where do we start to see, or where should we start to see red flags? What kinds of things can we be watching out for to know, oh, maybe this is an expectations issue versus something else?
Well, I think that would be the first question that I would ask. The minute I see my kid um, having difficulty, my first question is, how do I understand that difficulty? If my kid is, and by the way, in kids, while occasionally the anxiety is general, anxious about everything, more often the anxiety is about specific things. And if the anxiety is about specific things, then that, totally consistent with my model, gives us the opportunity to check in with the kid, right? I've noticed that you've been having difficulty going to birthday parties that your friends are inviting you to. What's up? I've noticed you've been having difficulty sleeping in your own bed at night. What's up? I've noticed that you've looked kind of sad lately, especially when you're doing homework that you're struggling with. What's up? So the signs, this is why we don't want to think of it as a shield. The sign is kind of an invitation to inquire further. If a kid is globally depressed, globally anxious, that could be something different, but that's actually not most kids. In most kids, it's more situational a good part of the time. And now we can look at these specific situations in which the kid is looking anxious, nervous, worried, scared, blue, irritable, and inquire. And the beauty of that is you don't have to figure it out all on your own. This is the beauty of it. Your kid is sending you a signal. Ask. You do not have to figure it out on your own. Ask.
That is one of the things that I appreciate so very deeply as a parent myself, because back to the concept that this is always about a relationship, it's not all on us to solve. We are not responsible for solving our children. We work with them, we collaborate with them, we engage in ongoing dialogue, and that is the key to their hearts and the key to demystifying a lot of these issues that we see in our daily lives.
And not only demystifying it for the kid, like, you know what, I can understand you being anxious about that. I can understand that making you sad, but also demystifying it for ourselves. The more we guess, the more of a mystery it is, because we guess wrong a lot. And the more wrong we guess, the more mystified we are about what's really going on. Ask. Demystify it for yourself, demystify it for your kid. Ask. Let's figure out together what's really going on. Parents feel so much pressure to not only figure it out on their own, but to have all the answers at the ready. It really gets in the way of asking.
So important. If anybody is watching this on video, please pause, rewind, and listen to that again. If you're reading it, go back and read that again, because this is a really critical point. Let's talk a little bit about outbursts in general. You know, we sometimes have a child who either has a big emotional outburst and it comes out as aggression or in some other way that is perhaps suboptimal, or our child implodes and they cry and they all of a sudden sort of sink into this pit of emotional despair. But either way, there's been a big something. Oftentimes we see that that same child will, for example, go and quickly hide behind a book or do something to kind of cover up what just happened. At least on the outside, it appears that they're covering up. Sometimes parents are tempted to look at that as a form of escapism. I would like to help reframe that a little bit. Let's talk about regulation and co-regulation and why sometimes kids might actually need to seemingly shut down a little bit after something like that before they can re-engage. And conversely, when is that perceived escapism something to worry about?
It's an interesting question, because I like to prove that the expectations that kids are having difficulty meeting are predictable. And in the CPS model, Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, we use an instrument called the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems to help us identify the expectations that a kid is having difficulty meeting. And by the way, it's in many cases, it's the same expectations every day, every week. If it's the same expectations every day and every week, then they're not surprising. They're predictable, and they can be solved proactively. And now, the escapism part doesn't matter so much, because if it's a high priority expectation, then we're solving the problem with the kid. And the kid isn't going to explode, the kid isn't going to implode, the kid isn't going to escape if it's a problem that we've already solved. The only time those things would come into play is on a problem that isn't solved yet. So, and you know, and some of the kids that I work with, when we first identify unsolved problems, there's like 40 or 50 of them, right? Because they do tend to stack up, right? When they don't get solved, they stack up. Slowly but surely, we're chipping away at the unsolved problems. And so if I were to see a kid doing something that I might interpret as escapism, or something that doesn't really require interpretation, like he's exploding or he's imploding, right? My mentality is, okay, what was that about? It wouldn't be over a problem that we've solved yet unless the solution's no longer working. It could only be about a problem that we haven't solved yet or haven't identified yet. My mentality would be less, I don't want him to escape, and more, Well, what's the next problem that we need to solve together? And then I don't have to worry so much about imploding, exploding, or escaping. You know what? I'm just paying attention to the expectations my kids having difficulty meeting. Seldom are they surprising. The only ones that aren't solved yet are the ones we haven't tried to solve yet. Let's get to work.
So important. And I love that you included there a solution that isn't working anymore. Perhaps sometimes we have solved a problem, and oftentimes as parents, it's tempting to think, but I already fixed that. Please don't make me fix it again. I don't know what to do this time. And relationships are dynamic. Our children are dynamic. They are always growing and evolving right before our very eyes. And the challenge for us is to do that alongside them and modify the solutions as the problem manifests differently, correct?
Totally. And along those lines, number one, expectations also evolve, right? We don't have static expectations. The expectations we have for our kid when our kid is 3 are completely different than the expectations we have for our kid when our kid is 7. So expectations change. Solutions don't always stand the test of time. But most importantly, as a parent, it is not your job to fix anything. It is your job to collaborate with your kid on solving things, and that's not totally on you. Because so long as it's totally on you, your kid's not going to know how to do it. But if you are engaging your kids in the process of solving the problems that affect his or her life, your kid learns how. If you're the fixer, how's your kid learn how to solve the problems that affect his or her life? So you're not in the fixing business anymore, you're in the collaborating business.
Yes, and it's that collaboration with ongoing connection that is really the only thing that we can reliably turn to, whether our child is 3 or 7 or, 17 or 77. It's really just connection and collaboration, no matter what the stage, yes?
Correct. Now you can connect with your kids over things that are not problems. Like if you take your kid to a baseball game and you two are connecting because you're having a good time together, that's connecting. So I would not say that all connecting is collaborating, but I would say that in my experience, when you're collaborating with your kid, you are definitely connecting.
Yes, yes, without a doubt. So important. Many of us who are raising emotionally sensitive children feel as if we spend a lot of time walking on eggshells. And that is certainly not a place that is empowering for us. That comes from a place of anxiety and all sorts of other stuff that we don't necessarily want to be perpetuating within the walls of our homes. So for the parent who is struggling with the I don't know what to expect next for our own expectations, how can we help regulate our own nervous systems and parent with confidence, parent with connection, not being afraid of the next, oops, I upset my child again, and here it's about to get ugly for the next 3 hours?
Well, it's interesting because my definition of walking on eggshells has always been you don't know when your kid's going to get upset next because you still haven't organized the effort. This is not criticism, but when I'm working with parents, it's mostly because we haven't yet figured out what the kid's unsolved problems are. So we're just waiting for the shoe to drop, right? That's the definition of walking on eggshells. But when you do know what your kid's unsolved problems are, you do know when the shoe is going to drop, right? Now you're not walking on eggshells anymore. I find that walking on eggshells is what we say about kids who we still feel are not predictable. But when you're identifying your kid's lagging skills and unsolved problems, your kid is not unpredictable anymore. Your kid is now very predictable. And not only that, you have embarked on the process of systematically and incrementally solving those problems, and you have a tool solving those problems collaboratively that is not going to set your kid off, generally speaking, helps your kid feel a sense of agency. You're not walking on eggshells anymore. You know exactly what's getting in your kid's way. And the more problems you solve, the less your kid is reacting to those problems in a way that makes you feel like the shoe is about to drop. So that's what walking on eggshells means to me. I don't know when it's going to happen again. I just know that it is, but I don't know what it's going to be over. In this model, you know exactly when your kid's going to get upset again because you've identified that stuff proactively and you're intervening proactively.
And that's precisely one of the things that I do love about your model, because it is not fear-based parenting. It is truly collaborative parenting. It is knowing the child, knowing the self as a parent, and figuring out what is this relationship so that there are no major surprises here. And when there aren't major surprises, we don't have to be afraid of any of it.
That's correct. And that's the beauty. If there is anything beautiful about the fact that the kid is getting upset about pretty much the same stuff every day and every week, I mean, there's something not beautiful about that, but there's something beautiful about that, and that is that makes your kid very predictable. Now, some parents who are listening to this will say, everything? How about 99%? We'll leave room for the 1% that truly surprises you. But the vast majority of things your kid is getting upset about have happened many, many, many times before, right? He's not eating what you made for dinner. He's not brushing his teeth before he goes to bed at night. He's having difficulty coming in for dinner when you tell him to turn off the Xbox. He's having difficulty waking up for school in the morning. This is the debris of living with chronically unsolved problems, right? There's just not that much novelty in what kids are getting, on what kids are struggling with, and therefore not much need for walking on eggshells so long as you're identifying those problems.
I love how you frame it as the debris. That feels so emotionally authentic and accurate to me. Fantastic. Let's talk about this in relation to brain science a little bit. We know that mirror neurons exist and that they're real and that they come into play every day in the relational dance that we do with our children. Let's talk about parenting style a little bit. Obviously, you are an advocate for positive collaborative relationships with our children. What happens if the parent is more authoritarian or more permissive, or these things that aren't the collaborative positive model that you talk about?
What happens? We help them be more collaborative. But what's interesting is, we can't guarantee a perfect match between parent temperament and kid temperament. There's no guarantees there, right? What there is that when there is incompatibility between parent temperament and kid temperament, what's crucial is that we have a mechanism for resolving those incompatibilities, right? So I don't strive for perfect compatibility because it doesn't exist, right? What I strive for is helping people learn a way to resolve incompatibilities, knowing that they will not be completely resolved, but in a way, collaboratively, that at least has both parties having voice, at least has both parties feeling a sense of agency, and at least has both parties feeling like they're working together, right? That's often the best we can do. Truth is, sometimes in some marriages, it's the best we can do, right? We are not temperamentally always perfectly compatible with our significant other. We just have to have a mechanism in place so that those incompatibilities do not fester, do not remain unresolved. So we need that in our marriages. We need that in our relationships with our kids as well, knowing that perfection is not the goal. It's always going to be some rough spots, but at least we have a way to collaborate on trying to make those things better. Exactly. Now, if that's brain science, that's great, right? For me, brain science actually makes a lot of common sense. I think what I just said is more common sense than brain science, but so be it.
So be it, because it does make sense. So I'm all there with you. For the parent who is struggling with the idea of giving their child respect, giving their child a voice. You know, many parents were raised with, you know, well, who's in charge here anyway? It's my way or the highway, and all the other cliches that we have heard throughout our lives, be it from our own upbringing or those around us. How can we help parents shift from that mindset to one of allowing their children into the space of true collaboration with us?
It's respecting the fact that giving your kid voice is good. It's respectful. It's how you learn who your kid is. It's how you relate to your kid. I've always said that kids who feel heard are much more willing to hear you. I've always said that the number one complaint I get from kids about their parents is that they don't listen. And the number one complaint I get from parents about their kids is the same. So I find that the breakdowns occur when we are parenting in a way that is so rigid that we're no longer listening. When we are no longer listening, boy, do we miss a lot about our kid. We miss out on a ton. But your kid misses out too, because your kid misses out on being able to tell you who they are and having who they are be respected. Why would we want to miss out on any of that just because, I'm going to use the name of an old TV show here, just because we think father knows best? You know what? I'm willing to acknowledge that fathers bring some wisdom to the mix. It's just that we have to also acknowledge that kids bring wisdom to the mix too. And that combined wisdom is always going to be a whole lot better than the wisdom of only one. But if we're parenting in a way that it's the wisdom of only one, then we miss out completely on the wisdom of the other. What a pity. We also miss out on the opportunity to talk to each other and hear each other and come to solutions that work for both of us. What a pity. All because father knows best. First of all, father doesn't always know best. But secondly, our hedge on the possibility that father could be getting it wrong is the fact that the kid has something to say too. The only reason that would be threatening is if we fear that if the kid's voice is heard, our voice will be lost. There's absolutely nothing about this process where your voice is lost. Your voice is just as important as it was. It's just that we're also recognizing that the kid's voice is important too, and that is much richer and much more productive than just only having one voice rule the day.
And herein lies the manual for parenting that many of us thought it doesn't exist. You know, these kids don't come with a manual. Well, sure they do. They tell us their part, we share our part, and together we figure out how to raise them. But this is
Here's
not
what's amazing.
a manual somewhere.
What's amazing is we are often willing to pay attention to and heed what infants are telling us. If an infant is tired, we heed it. If an infant is hungry, we heed it. If an infant is unhappy, we heed it. If an infant is overreacting to noises or lights, we heed it. Why do we stop heeding it, right? All because of authority. You can keep heeding what your kid is telling you and still feel like you are an authority figure. It can be done. Your voice will not be lost just because you're heeding your kid's voice. Y'all got to learn how to do this together.
Yes, yes, yes. You are speaking my love languages left and right here, so thank you. You said a word a couple of minutes ago that piqued my interest. You talked about rigidity. Oftentimes, we find ourselves raising seemingly rigid, inflexible, perfectionistic children, perhaps children who seem allergic to any sort of instruction or being asked to do certain things. They balk at the concept. For these children who respond in those ways or seem to generally live in that way more often than not. What's the key to starting the collaborative process here? Because this feels sometimes like a brick wall.
It may feel like a brick wall, but if I told you that the kids who were the impetus for me to move beyond my training in the direction of developing this model, you asked me, who are the kids who made it so that there was really no choice but to do that? It was the very concrete, literal, black and white, rigid, inflexible kids. They're the ones, because I was trained to teach parents to be more rigid, to teach parents to be more firm. This model is not really a reflection of how I was originally trained. It actually, surprising to many people, still does share some roots with the way I was trained, but it's different than the way I was trained. What I found with those black and white, rigid, inflexible kids is that hearing them, having their voice be heard without us instantaneously pushing back against their rigidity is crucial. So I would not, there's some kids who are rigid. I've always said everything's 100% nature and 100% nurture. I would say that parents who parent rigidly have a decent chance of modeling that for their kid, right? So maybe it's possible to produce one of these kids, but I also think that there are some kids who just are quite naturally very rigid in their thinking, and they carry sometimes diagnoses that, and I don't really care about the diagnoses, but there are kids out there who are just very rigid. If we want to move them off of their rigidity and onto hearing us and taking what we have to say into account, the first step is to hear them and to take what they have to say into account. And sometimes, I always find this to be entertaining, but many parents don't. It's not my kid, so I'm allowed to be entertained by it. Some of these rigid kids just have some fascinating viewpoints, right? And I see their parents sitting there wanting to go, do you see what I'm dealing with? And I'm frequently sitting there going, oh my God, this is so fascinating, right? Being in this kid's head and seeing how he sorts things through and seeing how he's making sense out of things is just fascinating. But if all we do with that is push back against it because we got common sense of our own, then the kid just digs in, right? We got to hear the kid, got to hear where the kid's coming from. We got to make sense out of it, even if it doesn't initially make sense to us. Kids who feel heard are more likely to hear us.
Yes, and so much of that, in my experience as a mama, not to mention as a parenting coach, is when I hear myself say, I'm noticing that you are upset about whatever it is. What do you think is going on here? If I can stop right there, it's much better than if I say, I think the problem might be, and here's how we solve it, because I might have asked the question, but I've already put my child in a box of what seems to be an acceptable response. That's not really collaborative, is it?
Well, and it's almost, I'm trying to come up with an analogy here. It's almost like I live in Portland, Maine, but I grew up in Miami, Florida, right? It's almost like somebody in Maine saying to me, it's not cold, right? It's 20 below. It's not cold, right? Why are you upset that, why are your teeth shattering? It's not cold, right? I'm sure that it's cold, right? But if you say to me, oh, looks like you're very cold, right? Now I'm there with you, right? At least you might not think it's cold, but you've at least acknowledged that I think it's cold. Now we can have a conversation, right? And by the way, not about whether it's cold, because cold is different for different people, right? But about the fact that I'm cold, even if you don't think I'm cold.
That's the perfect analogy, and it can manifest for so many different symptoms, for lack of a better word. We might not feel sad, we might not feel scared, but if our child is experiencing one of those things, it doesn't matter what we think. Casper might be the silliest thing in the world to us, but if our 3-year-old is going, oh my goodness, a floating thing, I don't know what to do with this emotionally, that's real for them.
So the story that I remembered, I don't know why I remembered it like a week ago, but it was a poignant one. My son played hockey, and I was at the hockey rink just chatting it up with some of the fathers. And one of the fathers, his daughter, who was a goalie, got all kinds of equipment on, difficult to get out of, comes over to the glass, and she's practically in tears and says to her father, I need to pee. And he said, you can't pee. He said, stay on the ice. And I remember thinking to myself, dude, what are you teaching here, right? Is this a lesson in toughness? Because you got other opportunities for that, right? Why are you not hearing your kid right now? She's practically in tears. We do that a lot. We take our own reaction and we impose it on our kid, even though that's not their reaction at all. And then we tell them that the way they should be reacting to it is the way we're reacting to it. That's a kid who's not going to feel heard.
Poignant example indeed. Yeah, I want to go find that girl right now and give her a hug and say, I hear what you need there. Let's facilitate that. Oh, goodness. Thank you for that. One of the things that you write about that is really a kind of a sticking point, and yet it's a really important point to unpack for parents, is that you write about not solving for behavior, but instead solving for the underlying concern. It is sometimes really hard to not get caught up in the behavior when you are faced with a situation and it's, right under your nose. What can parents do, especially if we don't know what the underlying concern is?
Well, your question has put us in the heat of the moment. I spend most of my waking hours getting people out of the heat of the moment. Whenever I'm working with a parent or a teacher, my most common refrain is, I'm gonna get you out of the heat of the moment. Unsolved problems are predictable. If they're predictable, they can be identified ahead of time. So we almost never find ourselves in the heat of the moment. I actually don't want people having to be quick on their feet in the heat of the moment, right? The heat of the moment's a bad time to figure stuff out. If that's going to happen, we want it happening 1% of the time. 99% of the time, we're figuring out what those unsolved problems are ahead of time. So there's almost never the likelihood that you're going to have to figure out what's going on in the heat of the moment, right? So that's big deal number one. Big deal number two is I refer to the behavior as the signal. The behavior is just the fever, right? It's just the way the kid is communicating to us that there's an expectation they're having difficulty meeting, right? So if all we're focusing on is the behavior, then all we're doing is modifying the behavior. All we're modifying is the signal, right? But one of the things the research on this model tells us is that when you're solving problems collaboratively and proactively, you are actually improving the kid's behavior every bit as much as you would have if all you were focused was on the behavior and modifying it. But when all you're focused on is the behavior and modifying it, you are not solving a single problem. Timeouts solve no problems. Going to bed without dinner solves no problems. All of these consequences that we are frequently doling out, they are our effort to say, I don't want to see that behavior anymore. Well, you're not going to see the behavior anymore if you're solving the problems that are causing the behavior. But if all you're busy doing is trying not to see the behavior anymore, the problems are still there, and you are still going to see some behavior, even if it's not the one that you're modifying.
Exactly. I wish that there were some way to metaphorically take out every first step in every house around the world to say there's no such thing as a naughty step. There is only a connecting way to get to the root of whatever is going on here. Anytime we send our child away, anytime we punish for behavior, we are not creating the wiring in their brains that I can come up with a better way to express whatever it is that was the motivation for this. Instead, children are learning, oh, when I do that, I suffer. But there's not a solution in that suffering.
Correct. If all we're busy doing is modifying behavior, we're still missing something.
Exactly.
And we're missing the most important part.
Exactly. Exactly. Not to mention the collaborative problem solving that you talk about
Correct.
so beautifully with children. You know, if we can do a time in instead of a time out and co-regulate with our child. And once they're regulated, then get into problem solving mode alongside them. How
But
much more effective it is.
once again, I'm not going to have to be co-regulating very often. If I'm identifying those unsolved problems ahead of time and solving them proactively, then there is significantly less need for heat of the moment co-regulating.
Absolutely. Yes. So important. You know, oftentimes when a child is acting out, let's take aggression, for example, the parent will come in and say, hit this pillow instead, you know, kick the couch cushion instead. Doesn't that actually increase cortisol? What's going on here? What are we actually training them in these moments?
Well, I'm worried about cortisol, but what I'm more worried about is pairing frustration with aggression. If you're frustrated, go hit something. Why do I not want to pair those two things? Because there's not always going to be a pillow. And if you're pairing frustration with aggression, then you're saying, you're putting into the kid's muscle memory, when you're frustrated, aggress. No, when you're frustrated, figure out what's frustrating you and solve that problem. And no pillow is going to be able to do that with a kid.
Thank you. Yes, so important. And that is one of the most common approaches I hear parents and caregivers and even teachers for that matter, certainly not all, but a lot of people say that's how you get your aggression out. You find a healthier place for it, but that's not the healthier place.
I don't think aggressing is the healthier place. I think that being frustrated is a very common human experience, but I don't think aggression has to flow from it. In fact, for most of us, aggression doesn't flow from it. We are frustrated and then we do something productive with it. Aggression, I would not say, is doing something productive with frustration. Here's the beauty of it. Frustration stands on its own, right? Aggression doesn't have to follow from frustration. Frustration stands on its own, right? So the two are not inextricably linked. There's all kinds of responses to frustration, aggression being one of them. Why don't we focus on what the kid is frustrated about, not on the fact that the kid is becoming aggressive in response to frustration? If you solve the problem that was causing the kid frustration in the first place, they are neither going to be frustrated nor aggressive in response to that problem anymore.
Exactly, exactly. I'm so glad you're spelling this out for parents because it really is a paradigm shift for a lot of us.
It is indeed.
Yeah. What about healthy aggression practices? There is some debate about whether there is a time and a place and a method for releasing pent-up anger and frustration when we are coming from a place of emotional regulation. Do you recommend anything like this? And if so, should we be modeling it in front of our kids, or is there another plan that we should be approaching this from?
Well, pent up frustration, in the parlance of my model, is a problem that just hasn't been solved yet. That's pent up frustration, right? So I'm sorry about all those unsolved problems, but I only have one solution to pent up frustration: solving the problems that are getting you pent up frustration in the first place. So adaptive aggression wouldn't be in my vocabulary. I'm not looking forward to pent up aggression in the first place. But if somebody's frustrated about something, I think what we want to model for our kids is that that's a problem that needs to be solved. If it gets solved, it won't be causing frustration anymore, pent up or otherwise.
Yes, yes. It's really more about ongoing regulation and finding ways to have healthy emotional outlets for all of the daily stresses before they build into these high tension scenarios. Yes, maybe it, exercise or meditation or prayer or whatever speaks to somebody's heart. Is that a better way?
Well, I would certainly take meditation over frustration. But here's what's interesting. If somebody leaves a meditation session feeling better and at greater peace, but they are walking into a life that still has all of those problems in it, then they're going to need meditation forever. Now, I would have no problem with somebody meditating forever, right? But I would find it counterproductive if they're just leaving the meditation and walking back into all of those problems that are still unsolved, right? Uh, Nothing takes the place of solving the problems that are getting us frustrated in the first place. And to tell you the truth, nothing is more emotionally regulating than being able to say to oneself, because of muscle memory and because of practice, this is just a problem. I've solved thousands of problems in my life. I can solve this one too. And if it involves somebody else, I know how to solve problems collaboratively. And I can solve this one too. Here's what's interesting. I find that a lot of the frustration we have in solving problems is because we feel like we are running into a brick wall. But if we know how to collaborate, there is no brick wall. To me, that's the definition of regulating one's emotions. It's taking the emotion one is feeling, frustration, and knowing that there is something productive that can be done with it. There's no doubt. Life is a frustrating place, right? Life is filled with problems that need to be solved, right? Just whenever things are going swimmingly in my life, I'm always saying to myself, well, I mean, maybe that's today, but tomorrow something's going to come up, right? The important thing is not for life to go swimmingly full time. That's the impossible dream, right? Emotion regulation to me means when you're faced with a problem, you experience the frustration that is natural, that everybody's going to experience, but rather than aggressing or becoming anxious about it or becoming depressed about it, you know what to do about it.
So important. And what comes up for me when you're talking about all of those things is really separating the problems from the person, getting rid of our limiting beliefs about who these problems make us, getting rid of lies that we tell ourselves, like, I am not worthy, I am not important, I don't have a voice in this relationship, all of those things that become about our definition of self.
Yeah.
And instead, looking at the problems as problems that are external to our innate wholeness as human beings, as parents, as collaborators.
Yes. And there's no doubt a lot of us bring baggage from childhood problem solving and how problems were solved with us, if you could even say that they were being solved, to how we try to go about solving problems as parents, and the confidence that we feel in our ability to do that. We all have baggage we have to look at. Some of it springs from how people solved problems with us. And here's the good news. Now that you're a parent, got to get on top of that baggage, but it doesn't mean you got to do things in the exact same way. But that baggage may be making you feel like you can't do it because you don't have muscle memory for it. You can create new muscle memory. Back then, you were just a kid. You didn't have much agency if it wasn't given to you. Now you're an adult. You have agency if you choose to take it.
What an encouraging and empowering message. We really do have the ability, through the gift of neuroplasticity, to rewire our brains and to help create healthier problem-solving strategies, healthier relationships with our children, and we don't have to live by whatever scripts we've been carrying up until this point. So,
That is correct. We can rewrite the script. We
yeah.
might need somebody's help in doing it. We might need somebody's help in identifying it for us. But then we got agency. And we don't have to do it all in one fell swoop. We can practice a little bit of it at a time. But we always have to ask ourselves, what do I want my kid's experience of being a child to be? And if I'm aware of my baggage, and if I'm aware of my old scripts, we can also say to ourselves, I'm not doing that to my kid. Now, some people say that and they move in the direction of total permissiveness. Nope. You still have expectations because you still have wisdom, experience, and values to transmit to your kid. And those ingredients are transmitted through your expectations. So you are not throwing your expectations overboard. You still have them. But if your kid is having difficulty meeting those expectations, you have a way of collaborating with your kid on solutions that gives both of you agency.
Ross, what a gift you are, and what a gift your wisdom is for parents. I sincerely appreciate not only the books you've written, but just the person that you are in talking with me about this. It's so real. It feels so empowering and so actionable. This seems like stuff we can actually do as parents. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime.